Wrong video. I don't think it's this one either. Is it this one? I think it's closer, maybe right country, different era. I remember now. I know where we're supposed to be.
Seinen Soldaten allesamt ins Gewehr. 200 Bataillons und an die 1000 Schwadronen und jeder Grenadier kriegt 60 Patronen. 200 Bataillons und an die 1000 Schwadronen und jeder Grenadier kriegt 60 Patronen.
There is a famous quote among historians of German history from Voltaire about the Kingdom of Prussia. That quote in its original French is "Lorsque certains États ont une armée, l'armée prussienne a un état," meaning that most states have an army, while the Prussian army has a state. This quote applies aptly to the life, the reign, and the success of Prussia during the rule of Friedrich II, more commonly known as Friedrich the Great. Despite King Friedrich and Prussia's shared reputation for militarism, Prussia, under his rule, was far more than an army. Friedrich was one of the most enlightened kings of his period, allowing unprecedented philosophical and social freedom. Despite this, he was not without faults, rumors, and opposition around his reign. Friedrich II earned his moniker the Great, and his legacy would go on to impact Prussia, German unification, and Europe for many years to come. Part 1. The Young Prince. Friedrich von Hohenzollern was born on January 24, 1712 to Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm I of Prussia and Sophia Dorothea of Hanover, who was a direct relative of the British royal family. Friedrich's birth as a male was very welcome news for Prussia, as now his father had a direct heir to the Hohenzollern throne of Prussia. Soon after the birth of Friedrich II, Friedrich I, his grandfather and king of Prussia, died, leading to Friedrich's father, Friedrich Wilhelm I, becoming king of Prussia. Friedrich Wilhelm I quickly centralized power under himself and became a far more authoritarian ruler than the past kings of Prussia. He was a rabid militarist. However, despite this, he wanted his children, especially Friedrich, to receive an education befitting nobles, but not one specific to royalty. Friedrich II, now crown prince under his father, rapidly gained an interest in the arts, music, and poetry, much to the disdain of his father, who wanted him far more militaristic crown prince. This led to Friedrich Wilhelm often physically and mentally abusing the young Friedrich. Despite this, Friedrich remained headstrong and continued his studies of philosophy, poetry, and culture. Friedrich, due to his father, and unlike most princes of the era, was not educated in a religious manner, as Friedrich Wilhelm, a Calvinist, feared he was not predestined. This would lead to Friedrich being a relatively secular king in a time of theocracy and divine right dominating Europe. It was at the young age of 16, rumors had already begun to develop around Friedrich II. Friedrich developed a close relationship with Peter Varl Christoph Keith, a servant of the royal family who was 13. Many biographers of Friedrich II believe this relationship was of a romantic nature. However, this has never been confirmed. His father, possibly finding the relationship distasteful, sent Friedrich away, separating the two. As a reaction to this, Friedrich confided in his sister, Princess Wilhelmine of Prussia. The two were friends until her death in 1758. Part 2. Rise to Power. An odd event in the history of the Kingdom of Prussia and the life of Friedrich the Great was the Katta affair. Friedrich and his friend Hans Hermann von Katta planned to secretly flee to the United Kingdom, as Friedrich Wilhelm's abuse had consistently hurt Friedrich II. After King Friedrich I found out about the plot, Katta was sentenced to death and executed, and Friedrich II never talked about this incident afterwards, and he was in a dark depression for a few days. Despite this, his father quickly arranged a marriage. Friedrich Wilhelm ordered Friedrich to marry Elizabeth Christine Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel-Bevern, a Protestant relative of the Austrian ruling house, the Habsburgs. Friedrich strongly resented this, as they had little in common, and Friedrich contended it was symbolic of Austrian domination of Prussian affairs. However, when Friedrich was king, no such domination ever occurred. Soon after this, Crown Prince Friedrich became a military officer much akin to his father. He was renowned even in the early stages of his military career as an effective commander. He served in the Prussian contingent of the army of the Holy Roman Empire that was sent to ensure that Augustus III received the crown of Poland in the War of Polish Succession. The Holy Roman Empire was coming to an end near this point in its very long history. It was losing central authority even more so than it had in the past, and was increasingly considered a vehicle for Austrian Habsburg interests, especially in Germany, where it was used to keep often pro-Austrian kings, such as those in Bavaria, strong and in the Austrian sphere of influence. The HRE at this point is a shadow of his former self and would finally collapse due to Napoleon in 1806. The War of Polish Succession ended in a Prussian-Austrian Holy Roman Empire victory in 1738 after 6 long years of combat. 2 years later, King Friedrich Wilhelm I died, leading to Friedrich II becoming the King of Prussia. The transition was remarkably stable despite the immense difference in interest and personality of the two kings. Friedrich II quickly solidified his authority as King of Prussia. Part 3. Highest Servant of the State. As Frederick came into power, he almost immediately began to fundamentally shift Prussian society and politics. Prussian cities like Berlin exploded almost overnight as Frederick increased government spending on the economy, allowing a freer economy, enabling Prussia's economy to grow rapidly. Prussia began to exert influence also in politics, as Prussia now asserted itself at the table of great powers of Europe, equal to Austria, France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. And while Prussia was nowhere near the size of those empires, Prussia had one great advantage: its military discipline. Prussia at this time was very small despite its strength. One of Frederick's first goals was to acquire the Austrian province of Silesia. This was for mostly 2 reasons. First, it had a very large Prussian population, like an annexation of a certain province in more recent history, and that it would further unify the spread out territories of Prussia. To accomplish this, Frederick challenged the succession of Maria Theresia to the throne of Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. The War of Austrian Succession began on December 16, 1740. The Prussians quickly occupied Silesia. Prussian armies were able to defeat the minimal Austrian garrisons. However, that was not the end of the war. France, sensing the opportunity to increase its own regional power, declares war on Austria in assistance of Prussia. This took the War of Austrian Succession from a small regional war to a worldwide war, with fronts being fought in North America and in Asia. Frederick, much like the traditional kings of his Kingdom of Prussia, took to the field to command his armies in battle.
Morgen diese Zeit haben wir den Feind geschlagen oder wir sehen uns nie wieder.
At the twin battles of Hura and Hohenfriedberge, Frederick the Great led his forces to victory multiple times. These 2 battles were both major defeats for the Austrian Empire. The outcome of these battles would decide the fate of Silesia. Austria recognized Prussia's right to hold Silesia after these 2 battles. While fighting in the Austrian War of Succession would continue for 3 more years, these 2 battles in 1745 ended Prussia's role in the war. Prussia gained the territory of Silesia and inflicted a massive defeat on the regional rival, the Austrians. Part 3. A New Europe. After the Austrian War of Succession, alliances undertook a massive and fundamental shift. Austria, led diplomatically by Prince Kaunitz, negotiated alliances. Austria aligned itself with France and Russia. Meanwhile, Prussia turned to Hanover and the United Kingdom. This led to a very different war when another war between the alliances broke out later in the century. Austria, to prove its regional dominance and emboldened by its allies, France and Russia, decides it must retake Silesia to regain regional dominance. However, as Prussia has shown in the Austrian War of Succession, Prussia is no pushover, and is willing to fight much larger enemies for territory and honor. Knowing that Austria and its allies planned to strike, Friedrich II was determined to strike first, and this would lead to the 7 Years' War. However, between these two wars, Friedrich was able to be the king he wanted to be, a king of the masses, a king of the people, rather than a king of war.
Dann müsst ihr halt ins nächste.
However, Frederick and his generals knew, even during the prosperous times of the 1740s and early 1750s, that war was on the horizon, and that this annexation of Silesia would not go without more conflict. Realizing war was on the horizon, Prussia invaded Saxony, an ally of Austria, in 1756, beginning the 7 Years' War. This war would quickly take on an international character just like the last war did. Britain and France would fight over their colonies in North America and in Asia, making this, the 7 Years' War, another major international conflict that went worldwide. The Prussians were often able to beat or hold off the Austrians and the Russians, far numerically superior opponents. Despite Prussian advantages in discipline, the Austrians and Russians were often able to wield very large forces that often overran the positions of the Prussian army. Fighting in the 7 Years' War would rage from 1756 until 1763. While Prussia took numerous casualties, they remained economically stable, unlike many of their opponents and their allies. During the war, the Prussian army swelled up to 190,000 soldiers, making it the fourth largest army in Europe at the time. Unlike Prussia, the 7 Years' War almost bankrupted many of Prussia's allies and enemies, such as the United Kingdom. However, by the end of the war, the United Kingdom had become the world's most foremost power. Despite the fighting leaving many Austrians and Prussians dead, the Prussians still managed to hold on to all of Silesia and most of Saxony during the war. This would mean that the war would end on terms favorable to Prussia and its allies. Despite his success in the battlefield, Frederick faced multiple losses during the period of the 7 Years' War. His dear sister, Wilhelmine, died in 1758, in the middle of the 7 Years' War. Soon after that, however, the war took a massive turn when Russia, the by far largest member of the coalition against Prussia, dropped out of the war. This occurred as Peter III, new Tsar of Russia, and his wife, Catherine the Great, or Catherine II, were both German, so they would not want to fight a fellow German for Austria. Russia's departure from the war essentially guaranteed an Anglo-Prussian victory. The end of this war also solidified the Anglo-Prussian alliance. The end of the 7 Years' War not only solidified Prussia's borders in the west, but also in the east. Prussia gained a substantial amount of territory from Poland in its east. Russia also gained a substantial amount of territory from Poland during the same period, in what became known as the First Partition of Poland. The Commonwealth of Poland-Lithuania was in an objectively difficult spot. It lay between two major rising powers, Russia and Prussia. Due to this, both Russia and Prussia began to take vast swaths of territory from Poland after the 7 Years' War. Frederick had a disdain for Poles despite his enlightened values. He still harbored animosity towards the Poles. A vocal point of this conflict was the city of Gdansk, or as in German, Danzig. Part 4. Making Prussia Great Again. By the end of the 7 Years' War, Prussia was much stronger than it was before, both militarily and economically. As I'm sure we know, it would become even stronger a bit later. The Kingdom of Prussia now held the stable seat in the kingdoms of Europe, as a respected and large power. Thanks to King Friedrich, Prussia was now on the map more than ever before. With the help of French economic experts, Frederick developed a system of indirect taxation, which increased his popularity with his people and enabled the government to get even more. Frederick practically alone built the Prussian bureaucracy from the ground up. Frederick allowed non-nobles to serve in the Prussian bureaucracy. This allowed the Prussian bureaucracy to effectively administrate a rapidly expanding country. Frederick also modernized the civil service of Prussia. While Frederick modernized the civil service, he also modernized education. Prussians rapidly became the most best educated people in Europe. Continuing his reforms, Frederick also modernized the judicial system and the legal system. Frederick allowed freedom of speech, freedom of literature, and even abolished torture. He even almost abolished the death penalty, making it only legal when the king himself signed off on the warrant. Frederick himself was a major patron of the arts and music. His most patroned artist was Jean-Antoine Watteau, a Frenchman. Frederick's court musicians included some of the best composers of classical music of all time, including Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, son of Johann Sebastian Bach. Frederick was also a driving force behind the improvement of German culture. He sought increased codification of the German language, making it sound better and also easier to read. Frederick had immense admiration for French and Italian culture. As a result, he often spoke French to his very close associates. He also did a majority of his writing in French. Despite his adoration for the French language, Frederick founded the Königlich Deutsche Gesellschaft, which was Germany's first official language association. This was done in an effort to promote German culture and to make it more like its European counterparts in Italy and France. Frederick was renowned for his improvement of land use and life of peasantry in Prussia. He founded the first veterinary school in all of Germany, and was also an early environmentalist. He also substantially expanded Prussia's farmland, enabling Prussia's population to grow further, thanks to increased food supplies. For this, and his promotion of the use of the potato, he became known as Der Kartoffelkönig, meaning the Potato King. Prussia during his rule was also a center of philosophy. Philosophers from all over Europe came to stay in Prussia, even the infamous Voltaire was allowed in Prussia. Despite these improvements in Prussian society and culture, Prussia would soon be dragged into another major war. Part 5. The War of Bavarian Succession. Joseph II of Austria sought to avenge his mother's defeat at the hands of Friedrich the Great. To accomplish this, Joseph II declared himself King of Bavaria as well as Emperor of Austria. This act would destroy the careful balance of territory and influence that Austria and Prussia had after the 7 Years' War. Both Frederick and Joseph knew this move would mean war with Prussia, and that war happened and became known as the War of Bavarian Succession. The War of Bavarian Succession began in July of 1778. Despite very large maneuvers of troops on both sides, with both sides willing up to 150,000 soldiers, fighting was minimal in this war. What little fighting occurred was usually Prussian victories, along with their allies in Bavaria and Saxony. In May of 1779, the Treaty of Teschen was signed. This ended the war and gave Frederick the victory, as Joseph would not gain the throne of Bavaria. Part 6. The End of an Era. Friedrich the Great, also known by his affectionate nickname Old Fritz, died on August 17th of 1786. Friedrich the Great reigned for 46 years, the longest of any Hohenzollern king. Frederick made Prussia into an economic powerhouse, with fruitful philosophy, a strong civil society, immense military power, and a nation worthy of being a power in Europe. Friedrich the Great was buried in an elaborate tomb in Potsdam, Germany. The likes of Alexander I of Russia and Napoleon were both visitors to his tomb. Friedrich and his wife bore no children, therefore his nephew Friedrich Wilhelm II became the King of Prussia. He undid many of Friedrich's most liberal reforms, such as those on freedom of speech and religion. But while Friedrich was gone, the legacy of Friedrich the Great could never be undone. Part 7. His Legacy. Despite Prussian decline after Friedrich's death, Prussia was on the winning side of the Napoleonic Wars. After the initial part of the war where Prussia was defeated, Friedrich the Great's legacy was evoked by the kings of Prussia to help their nation fight back the French invader. Friedrich's legacy continued to be evoked by Prussia as its quest for German unification began in the 1840s. Even the German Empire, under Wilhelm I and Wilhelm II, used Friedrich the Great's image as a great German king. It is this legacy that makes Friedrich a memorable historical figure that will continue to be studied, analyzed, and admired through time. Thank you for listening, and I hope you sincerely enjoyed my look at the history, the reign, the rule, and the life of Friedrich the Great of Prussia.
Просто стать альпинистом, космонавтом или врачом, моряком или пианистом, все ему это нипочем. Путин может все что угодно, плавать, мчать по трассе, дрова рубить. Путин может все что угодно, то чего не может Путин, не может быть. То, чего не может Путин, не может быть. По порядку в стране он главный газ.